سپاه پاسداران میگوید یک پهباد آمریکا را در هرمزگان سرنگون کرده است. آمریکا میگوید پهبادی بر فراز ایران نداشت.
Don't forget, President Trump has used Tomahawk surgical strikes twice before in the Middle East. This was not an empty threat. It was a last-minute decision to stand down. This is the reporting of the New York Times. It all stems from the drone that was shot down Wednesday evening around 7 p.m. That was the RQ-4 Global Hawk drone that came down. President Trump, after that, then approved military strikes against Iran, and it's reported that the operation was underway in its early stages. Planes were in the air and ships were in position, but no missiles had been fired when word came to stand down. All day yesterday, President Trump giving nothing away.
Iran made a big mistake. They made a very bad mistake.
How will you respond?
You'll find out.
Are you willing to go to war with Iran?
You'll find out. You'll find out.
As late as 7 p.m., military and diplomatic officials were expecting a strike after intense discussions and debate at the White House among the president's top national security officials and congressional leaders. It's not clear if this was because of strategy, logistics, or indeed whether the strikes might still go ahead.
Look, I said I want to get out of these endless wars. I campaigned on that. But this is a new wrinkle. This is a new fly in the ointment, what happened shooting down the drone. And this country will not stand for it.
On Thursday, President Trump insisted the U.S. drone was flying over international waters when it was shot down by a surface-to-air missile. Iran's government continuing to insist that, in fact, the American drone had strayed into Iranian airspace. Look, either way, this is a clear warning. The steady increase in attacks that we've seen from Iran, the tankers first back in May, then as recently as last week, the increased uranium enrichment, all leading up to this.
That's right. And breaking overnight, you know, you wonder why we stood down. If we had the planes in the air and the ships were in position, there's a story on Reuters that apparently Iranian officials told Reuters that Tehran received a message through the country of Oman from the President of the United States. And his message was he was against any war and wanted to talk to Tehran about various issues. And Benjamin, he gave a short period of time to get our response, but any response was up to the Ayatollah. A second Iranian official said the leader is against any talk. So it sounds like he told Iran, let's talk. We got a lot of stuff on the table. Let's work it out. In the meantime, he looks reasonable.
Look, time and time again, President Trump has said he is open for talks with Iran. He has tried to de-escalate this in the past. This seems to have been one last attempt, and yet it seems to have had no response. I mean, they've just passed it on to the Ayatollah. And it reminds you that Iran is very conflicted domestically, that you have the Ayatollahs and the hardliners, many of whom may well want to go to war, and you have the more moderates who want dialogue. And I think that until you know who is calling the shots in Iran, it's very difficult to deal with them.
It makes you wonder what's really happening behind the scenes, because the president is tough and he's not afraid, doesn't want to go to war. But we were getting word that they were going to do this strike before dawn because they didn't want to risk hitting civilians, children, Iranian military. What do you think is happening? What do you think the reason is that he pulled back last night?
It's hard to say. I mean, it does seem as if maybe there is the opportunity for more dialogue, perhaps. But I think also he'd want to speak to allies, get some sort of a coalition behind him. I think that first and foremost, it's important to protect oil tankers traveling through the Straits of Hormuz, and you could have other allied navies help with that, come on board with that. Whether there was pressure from other countries to avoid this, of course, many countries rely heavily on this oil in a way that the U.S. doesn't as much anymore.
Right.
You look out east, China, Japan, heavily reliant. 68–70% of their oil comes from this part of the world. And it's interesting, actually, that this comes just before President Trump meets with President Xi in China, because this really puts the pressure on them more than it does
100%.
on the U.S.
Right. North Korea is watching. All our enemies are watching. Of course, Assad is watching. And for 7 weeks, nothing but provocations. There's a price to pay for inaction. and that says a lot. And I think that we have put suffocating sanctions on them, and every day that passes by, they get weaker. However, every day that passes by, when they blow up 4 tankers and we do nothing, when they blow up our drone that cost $130 million and we do nothing, we know it's not going to end there. So at some point in the Middle East, no action looks like weakness, and weakness begets more attacks.
Yeah, I suppose you could flip that on its head and say that all the actions that we've seen from Iran suggest that the U.S. actions are working. That these
economic actions.
Yes, and perhaps this is Iran really backed into a corner. President Trump has made it clear he wants one thing. He wants to come back to the table. He wants to talk again about a better deal, a deal which involves a lot more than the JCPOA did.
سرنگونی پهباد آمریکا بر فراز تنگه هرمز. سپاه پاسداران میگوید در حریم ایران بود، آمریکا میگوید در حریم بین المللی.
News update on Facebook Watch. I'm Carly Shimkus. Iran shooting down an unmanned American aircraft. The Navy says the drone was flying in international airspace about 17 miles from Iran when it was targeted. But Iran contends the drone was flying in its airspace. An Iranian commander says they're, quote, ready for war. It's not clear yet how the U.S. will respond to the provocation. Dan Hoffman, a former CIA station chief, tells Fox and Friends First that these actions all come down to the nuclear deal.
The Iranians are mounting what I would call a gradual campaign of escalation. I think it's important to keep in mind what Iran's goal is here. We're in a battle for leverage with the Iranians. We have crippled their economy and caused their currency to go into free fall, all with an eye towards inducing them to return to the negotiating table so that we can fix that very flawed nuclear deal. They're simply not admitting what they're doing because they'd like to delay an international response.
Right.
But at the same time, we know it's Iran, and they're doing this to threaten Europe and us and induce us to return to the negotiating table on their terms.
Well, the U.S. warships and helicopters are now racing to recover the downed drone before Iranian forces can get it first.
President Trump reportedly making a last-minute decision to call off military strikes against Iran overnight. The entire world now waiting to see how the White House responds to Iran's unprovoked attack. Now, that video that you're looking at was released from the Pentagon reportedly, and that is actually showing Iran hitting our drone. Well, Foreign Affairs correspondent Benjamin Hall is here with what the rest of the world is saying. Good morning. Thanks for coming back.
Good morning, Heather. Well, of course, this is a part of the world which many countries have a vested interest in, and we'll be waiting throughout the day to see what the response is to this news that there was an aborted attack. But already yesterday, we were hearing from Iran, even when there was just the possibility of an attack, they had threatened to respond. Take a listen.
Those who defend the borders of the Islamic nation of Iran will react in a total and decisive way to any intrusion by foreign elements on our land. Our borders are our red line.
But it is Iran who has been escalating, and escalating now for some time. First, we had those attacks on the tankers in that critical waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, where 21 million barrels of oil a day passes through. And then we had the announcement that they will begin enriching uranium beyond the 3.6% that's allowed by the JCPOA, possibly pushing it up towards 20%. That's something that could put them within a year of building a bomb. So clearly a need for some kind of response. And then all leading up to Wednesday evening's shooting of that drone by an Iranian surface-to-air missile from Iran's coast. We can see that here. That was released by the DoD. And Iran is fiercely disputing the president's characterization. They're saying that the drone had strayed into Iranian airspace, but there is no doubt now that the U.S. is willing to respond if they have to, and certainly that will put Iran on the back foot.
Yeah, and you mentioned what Iran had said in reference to the Strait of Hormuz. He gave, what, a July 7th deadline for that? So we'll watch that date to see if Iran has any other further action, because this obviously not the first thing that they've done. We were talking about reaction from other countries. Have we heard anything from Russia?
We have. We heard yesterday from Putin, and of course Putin, a close ally of Iran's in Syria. They've been working together there for some time now, and he spoke out yesterday, and here's what he said.
I want to say it would be a catastrophe, for the region at least, because it would lead to an influx of violence and possible to an increase of flow of refugees from the region.
Not just Russia. It'll be interesting to hear what China has to say. It is China who will be economically hit by the rise in oil prices. They rely heavily on this, whereas the US, of course, doesn't anymore. The US provides a lot of its own energy at the moment. So I think China will also be watching this closely, and bear that in mind when President Trump meets President Xi next week at the G20.
Yeah, and it all, ties in. It's so interesting if you take a look at all these different countries. You mentioned Syria and how Iran is tied in there along with Russia. And this would be, in fact, what Trump's third attack, if in fact he does attack Iran, because the first two were in Syria in 2017 and 2018, right?
That's right. He has always said that, if his red lines are crossed, he will respond. And in Syria, it was the use of chemical weapons, sarin gas, by the Assad regime. And he very quickly reacted. We were on the ground nearby when that happened. And that was a clear sign at the time that President Trump will respond. He's willing to respond, and he has the means to do so.
Yes.
So, again, we don't know for a fact that this attack on Iran, this surgical strike, won't take place. Just for the moment, it has been shelved.
And then, of course, everyone's ties with North Korea, looking at that as well, especially when you bring up China. Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate it. Great to have you with us.
My pleasure.
A Situation Room meeting on Iran underway now at the White House as the president takes a new, calmer, more measured tone toward Iran. This after military officials said Iran shot down an American drone over international waters, the latest escalation of tensions between Tehran and Washington. Iran releasing this video that it claims shows the shootdown. The Pentagon putting out this video. President Trump now suggesting the whole thing could have been a mistake. But this is the first attack in this recent round of tension for which Iran has taken credit. Iranian officials claim the drone was at one point in their airspace and that the shootdown would send a clear message to Washington. Pentagon officials say that is false and that this was an unprovoked attack. The president pushed back on both Iran and the Pentagon, saying the shootdown may have been the result of human error.
I have a feeling that it was a mistake made by somebody that shouldn't have been doing what they did.
Who do you think did
I think they made a mistake. And I'm not just talking to the country made a mistake.
Well, when asked if the United States will respond, the president said, "You'll find out." Overall, analysts say President Trump's morning comments suggest Washington may not immediately respond, though the president also said it would have made a big difference had this been an attack on American personnel instead of an American machine.
Please share and like.